Welcome to AI Goes to College, the podcast that helps higher education professionals navigate the changes brought on by generative AI. I'm Dr. Craig Van Slyke, and I host the podcast along with friend, colleague, and co-host Dr. Robert E. Crossler. Combined, Rob and I have over 40 years of experience in higher education, serving in roles ranging from adjunct faculty to dean. We're here to help you figure out what in the world's going on with generative AI and, more importantly, what you can do about it. Welcome to the very first live stream of AI Goes to College, the podcast that helps you figure out just what in the world is going on with generative AI in higher ed. So we want to thank the organizers of the International Conference on Information Systems Education Research Workshop, the conference committee, Tanya over there, who you can't, well, no, it's a 360 camera. You might see her back there in the back. And Rosetta Romano, who is online, she was the one who came up with this idea. All we did was say, okay. And this is sponsored by the Association for Information Systems Special Interest Group on Education, better known as SIGED, because I'm not saying that again. So this is sponsored by SIGED, and we want to thank the SIGED board for helping us. And we also want to thank Hazel Crossler for handling the sound. That's a really clever way of saying, if there's any problem with a sound, blame it on Hazel Crossler, who is, yes, the child of Rob Crossler.
Okay. And a master's student in music at Middle Tennessee State University.
Which makes it all the more embarrassing if the sound really stinks. We want to make this very loose, as you can tell. We've got some questions, but we sincerely welcome questions from the audience, either online or those of you who for some reason just have to sit down instead of all these tables that we set up our entire arrangement around. Well, let's get started. So Rob, what are some surprising generative AI uses that you've run into? Surprising, none of the normal stuff.
Surprising. The surprising one that made faculty squirmish was students learn how to create transcripts for their presentations and then feed those transcripts for their presentations into an AI tool that automatically created voices for their presentations, which stayed under the 5-minute limits and then were the most boring presentation you ever saw, perfectly dictated by a machine with a transcript created by a machine.
Squirmish is a word now, is that? Okay,
So.
okay,
Yeah.
we've coined a word. That is surprising. What's surprising is that had to be at least as much work as just recording the stupid video.
It was, but the students were comfortable because they didn't have to stand up in front of people and talk themselves. They were able to push off what I would call that friction point of professionally teaching and push that to the machine.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem. We're going to get into that sort of problem a little bit more later. I've been doing vibe coding.
I read your newsletter.
We'll talk. Thank you. Yes. By the way, all things AI Goes to College are available at aigoestocollege.com. So who is vibe coded? It is the strangest thing. You tell the AI interface what you want and it creates it. So do you all know what a landing page is? So you just have this landing page. It's a website. It's not a big deal to create, but if you want one that really looks good and that drives the kind of action you want it to drive, it takes a while to do. I created one in about 15 minutes. Deployable out there on the web, ready to go in 15 minutes. And I did several other things. I did these micro apps, which I think is a made up word like squirmish. The little personal apps.
In a world of new technologies, Craig, we're allowed to make up new words.
That's right. That's what we do. And so these are little productivity apps that I don't want to pay a subscription for. A time blocking app, one that helps me keep track of my projects with like a Kanban board. These are things that I was paying $20 or $30 a month to do. Over Thanksgiving weekend, I created these apps. And there's a payoff to this. I'm not bragging because anybody could have done this. I think this fundamentally changes the game for knowledge work. So that's what's the most surprising thing to me. I'm convinced that information systems, our field, is what I call the canary in the coal mine. That's the metaphor that I'm using. It's the early signal for what's going to happen with knowledge work. So this thing that used to take somebody with deep expertise days to do, I did in a matter of a few hours. And I quit coding 30 years ago. So I see this coming for knowledge work of all sorts.
So let me ask a follow-up question to that, because I've seen that argument made, but the counter argument is it's easy for the simple things. But when you take that to the level of the enterprise and do complicated enterprise apps, it falls down and people spend more time debugging and getting it to work than if they would have just done it themselves. How do you see those two views coming together?
So vibe coding is not for that. That's not what it's for. What vibe coding is for doing little stuff quickly. There are other systems like Claude Code and Codex from OpenAI, and Google just released theirs, which has a very weird name, anti-gravity. And those are environments where professional coders can make themselves more efficient. But that's not what vibe coding is. But one of the things we do, those of you who may not be in information systems, one of the things we've been trying to do for a long time is to not try to spend a lot of time figuring out what the requirements for a system are by talking to users, because they never know. You build these prototypes and let the users use the prototype and say, wait, it doesn't do this, or I don't like the way it does that. That's what you can do with vibe coding, because that never gets rolled out up to scale with all the security controls and that kind of thing. But it takes hours and hours and hours to do, and now it doesn't.
So what I hear you saying is that the way we do systems analysis and design, that process is completely changing and is able to do things perhaps differently than we've ever done before.
I think that's the case. But I think that we're going to see this with other types of knowledge work. Right now it's us because, we're gearheads and we were the early adopters for for AI, and it just kind of makes sense for us. But you're going to see this go into accounting, into finance, into law. And it's not going to be, this does everything. It's going to be, it does this one thing really well, small scale, or it makes other things easier. One of the biggest mistakes people make with AI is they want it to do 100% of something. That's the wrong way to think about it. When I give talks, I have a slide that says 50% is greater than 100%. Try to get AI to save you half of the effort. We have faculty in the audience. What would you pay for something that cuts your grading time down in half? If I had kids, I don't know if it'd be my firstborn, but my secondborn would be in trouble. So,
I have to say the same thing right now. My firstborn's standing right next to me.
So you're cool, but I don't know. But that's what vibe coding does. It may not do the whole scalability thing, and it shouldn't, but it can do a lot. And I really think that's what's coming for virtually everybody that gets a degree to get a job.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some real changes. The prototyping, I think, is going to be the first easy one. And where I see that being great for information systems students in some ways is it doesn't require them to necessarily work with the engineers to create the prototype solutions.
No offense to you engineers out there. It's not that we don't love you.
But you think about then, where does the engineer's time get spent if we aren't quite yet at that point where we are able to completely redo the building of those enterprise systems? The focus can be on there. Another thing that I think is really important to point out as we think about these things as large language models, and which are part of the generative AI systems, is there's a lot of pieces to the generative AI systems that need the technical know-how to make sure that they work. And a lot of engineering thinking as businesses start to customize and make their systems work just for them are going to be around that engine and that system that helps to automate this in ways that are specific to each company and to each industry.
All right. Anything else on that one?
No, I think it was good.
All right. Well, we have questions from listeners. First one came from a student who I'm going to refer to as AM because that's their initials. So that's how I'm going to refer to them. So AM sent us an email a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about desirable difficulty, which is a term that was introduced by Robert A. Bork. And it's something that we've been calling useful friction. So you don't learn if you don't do any work. So one of the problems with AI used inappropriately is it removes friction that's useful friction. And so he was commenting on that episode where we talked about that. But here's the question. In your experience as educators, what is necessary for desirable difficulty, and how might generative AI be leveraged by the teachers and students to create that kind of difficulty?
So we've been talking about this at Washington State University, where I work a lot. And one of the solutions that we've been leaning towards and trying to push more towards is live projects in more classes, where we take something that is ill-defined from organizations that are willing to work with our students and give them these real-world problems that can't just be fed into the machine to find an answer. And so the machine might be part of getting there, but that process of large-scale problem solving is where we're trying to do more of.
Okay. Is that trying to maintain the friction? Tell me more. I don't get how that maintains the friction.
Well, it helps. The students aren't going to be able to come up with a simple solution. They're going to have to say, here's the process we need to go through to solve this problem. Here's the inputs we have. They're going to start down a road, and then they're going to be given more information that is going to change their thinking. They're going to have to pivot. They're going to have to adjust. And it's not going to be the simple creation of a thing, but it is going to be solving a problem that really doesn't have a known solution. So it really is their process of problem solving that becomes more what you're looking at as opposed to what is created.
So it shifts the friction.
Correct.
And also raises the bar a little bit. This actually came up during the workshop today where we talked about, and again, I hate this term, soft skills and problem solving skills and that sort of thing. Isn't that soft skills? Doesn't that make it sound like they don't matter?
Greg, I got a new term that I like to use, and I've heard this in a couple places: social skills. It has more to do with their social interaction as opposed to soft skills, which kind of does have a different nomenclature to a different perspective.
Yeah, so I like social skills, humanistic skills. That's way too geeky, but I like that one too. People skills, yeah, could be. But well, I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that. So social is going to extend to AI here soon. So I don't know. We're going to have to think about that. The thing that what you were talking about, Rob, triggered in my mind is this idea of complex thinking and problem solving. You're not talking about just doing some little thing. You're having to think through and kind of push the envelope and come up with a solution to some sort of a problem. Where I see this going with generative AI is what I've been calling co-cognition or co-created cognition with generative AI. So if you use the AI to help you think in ways that you might not be able to do on your own, but also in ways that AI couldn't do on its own, putting thanks in quotes, then you've created something with the tool that couldn't be created without the tool, and the tool could not create on its own. And I think that's where we need to be pushing, and that's what you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's really coming up with creative ideas, and that's what I want to empower people to do, encourage people to do, is to find ways to look at expecting more, because I think we can expect more in this world of AI, but to begin looking at walking alongside the students in their processing, to be able to evaluate their critical thinking skills, their problem solving skills, all of those things that we've had a hard time doing before. I think the door's open to that. And I think if we're to think about an experimental world where every faculty member gets to run their own experiments and how they're doing things in their classroom, we're going to come up with a lot of things that don't work. But in the process, we're going to come up with a lot of things that.
You're an administrator now. That's a horrifying thought. Every faculty just going off and doing what they want to do. Let's take a tangent on this. So we've been having some email conversations with our colleague Franz Belanger, who's here in the audience and is also our co-author on our book, Information Systems for Business, an Experiential Approach, which is in edition 5.1 and is published by Prospect Press of Vermont. And the publishers are here with us, Beth and Andy Golub, and we appreciate that. That's our first commercial. That's our first commercial on AI Goes to College. And I was talking about something.
Did they pay you for that plug, Craig?
I was talking. Well, yeah, they do pay us for that plug. Yeah. They do quite well. So we were communicating about how you can, not AI proof, but how you can either enhance, or we didn't use the word resistant.
Resilient is the word I
Resilient,
like.
AI resilient. I like that term. And Franz, would you like to tell us about what you've been doing? She would not. So you have to come up with the microphone. I'm going
But while
to
she's
pay
coming up,
for this
I
later.
think this is something that we're about to talk about that every professor should be thinking about. And that is the AI resilience of every class they teach. Because if you can cheat your way through higher education, what we offer is worthless. So this is one of the most important things that we're dealing with right now.
Well, they are able to cheat their way through, and the really smart students will still be able to beat what I've come up with this semester. So I teach an online only class, asynchronous. I'm not allowed to have them be there at a specific time, so I can't do any of the live exams. So I have a semester project. It's real life in organizations, as you were saying. So this works really well, but I also want to know that they're actually reading the materials for each module and that they actually understand it. How do you do that? Well, can't do tests, can't do essays. I've tried every single essay into AI and it gets perfect grades. If you do quizzes, well, they download the PowerPoints, they get the AI to write the scripts, they run the scripts to the questions, and they get full grades. So what do I do? So what I decided to do this semester is I have 4 cases that they discussed during the semester. And I created, with the help of the AI, I created knowledge questions. And so the questions make them use the content of the modules and apply it to the case, but really not based on case questions that you would normally have. And so they have to be able to use the content, each of the modules before. I use 3 or 4 modules, put a question in, they have to demonstrate the ability to think and then now, can they cheat this? Of course they can. But hopefully most of them can demonstrate some knowledge. So,
I have a question for you. This just occurred to me. So we say they can cheat with this, and they can cheat. Cheating was not invented by generative AI. Ask me how I know. But maybe if they cheat with an assignment like that, they're actually learning something.
yeah, I was thinking about that too. So if they go to the trouble that every step that they need to do to beat my new thing, they're going to learn something. And I use AI all the time. And I know that I even get to the point of challenging the AI. Why are you telling me this? And it's quite interesting. And so if they get to that point, that's what they're going to do in their lives later. My problem is in an online class, I don't want the majority of them to just download PowerPoint lectures and send that to me as I've been in the course.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you said is something important. And if we're all using AI to help make our jobs more efficient and make you better at them, why shouldn't we expect our students to? So in many ways, guiding them in proper uses of these tools and how to do that is the other part of what we need to be thinking about.
Why wouldn't we want them to use it? I want them to use it. I taught doctoral seminars all year, and I encouraged the students to use AI and showed them how to use it and told them how I was using it. It's a tool that's going to be out there. It's something they're going to use, and if they don't, they're going to fall behind. So I don't think anybody in this audience is just outright banning AI, but if you know people that are, I'd push back on them a little bit, or just stay out of it because it's not your business, but that's your choice.
One thing I would say, though, is as you're encouraging students to use AI, or whether it's colleagues, transparency, I think, is crucially important. Because if we do it in the darkness, we don't know what's going on. We don't know how it's being used. And we can't talk about what is the viability, how good is that information that was received if we don't know how it was created.
Yeah.
So talking about that openly is important. And I think the first way we get to that level of transparency is to say, Yeah, we allow it, but we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely the case. If we try to outright ban it, they're going to hide it, and we're not going to be able to help them adjust the way they're using it. So I did require disclosures. Tell me how you're using it, and they're also very motivated students, because if they didn't get what I was putting out, they're going to have a lot of trouble when it comes up to their comprehensive exams. And so I don't have to give them a bunch of assignments and stay on top of them. I don't have quizzes. They're motivated students. And this is something we've talked about in the past. That's our big job, is to change higher ed from this point-based transactional view to something that taps into their motivation to learn. We don't have to give them points to learn cheats on Grand Theft Auto. Is that still a cool game? I don't know. I don't do games.
Well, we got business professors making jokes about Grand Theft Auto before GTA 6.
There you go. Okay, that's right. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Delayed again, by the way. Delayed again, by the way. But we don't have to motivate. You don't motivate little kids to learn. They learn because they want to know stuff. And we have to. It's a heavy lift. It's going to take a long time to do, but that's what we need to be doing. I think that's our number one job.
Well, and it, one of the things that is essential for students after they enter the business world is to continue learning, because 3 or 4 years ago, nobody was using generative AI in their jobs. And now it's expected, and you've had to figure out how to do it. You've had to learn how to do it. And that's just one example. New technologies come around all the time that change how we do things. And if you can't continue to learn, which really is what I hope you're learning in college more than anything else, you're going to be stuck.
Yep.
One thing I want to ask you about, Craig, is we were talking last night a little bit.
Did you see that? He
Yeah.
backed away from me.
Yeah, I know
when he said it.
saw
So this
coming.
is going to
You
be
saw
good.
this
Yeah.
coming. Because you kind of asked me, and then you didn't love my answer last night. So, but one thing we've seen a lot of is the importance of oral exams, and how in an oral exam, a student sitting in front of you, you can get a good sense: did they learn the things? Did they know the things? And we're discussing that, and the idea of scale came up, and
Yeah.
how do a lot of higher education to make money, to be able to pay the bills, we have classes that are larger than 10 students. This is easy. 100 students, not so easy. How does this scale to be able to do oral exams, or to do these creative things that maybe take more one-on-one getting to know your student?
10 students isn't even the first row of the auditorium I teach undergrads in. And this is the other part of the conversation we've been having online about scalability. I don't know the answer to that. I'm really concerned about trying to find a way to scale, especially if you've got a highly constrained set of circumstances like Franz does. I mean, what I'm going to do is just base the big chunk of the grade on 2 exams they have to come in and take. And then everything else drives them to prepare for the exams. You do this stuff, you're going to do better on the exam. You don't want to do it. You're adults with agency. Don't do it. I don't care, but you don't get to whine at me afterwards about if you don't like your grade. And I think we have, God, I'm going to sound so old right now. We've gotten these darn kids to where they expect hand-holding, and they expect us to make the decisions for them. You want to do the homework? Do the homework. You don't want to do the homework? I don't care. It's one fewer that I have to grade. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but only a little bit. I think if we treat them like adults, they respond more like adults. And that's not my thought. I'm not the first one to say that.
So I'm
That
going to
was-
follow up with that, because I'm going to put
Thank God, because I had no idea where I was going with
I'm an
that.
assistant professor, and student evaluations are super important to me. I'm not getting tenure without good student evaluations. And it's easy for the full professor to say, who cares if I fail a bunch of students because they won't rise to the challenge? When if that's me, I may not have my job in 3 or 4 years.
I had the same attitude as an assistant professor. I think they respond well as long as you're matter of fact. You don't have to be a jerk about it. It's like, look, if you do what I'm asking you to do, you're going to do well in this class. If you don't, that's kind of on you. I mean, I can't do anything about that. I don't want to, I'm tired of being the homework police. That's not why I got a doctorate. So, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never really had students push back, but you cannot be a jerk. You've got to be matter of fact. You can't be lording it over them, bossing them around, and just kind of look. Do it, don't do it. I think you're crazy if you don't do it.
Well, and I think a key part of what you say in that is the importance of students understanding the why. If we ask students to do something and we say, this is what you need to know to do well in this class, that's one thing. But if we can connect that why a little bit further and help them to understand that knowing this is going to help you with this other thing, or it's going to help you to succeed in this aspect of a career path that takes you this way. When students understand the why, I found that they are more willing to actually do the hard thing because they see the payoff at the end, not just busy work my professor asked me to
Right.
do.
And that's another thing I think we need to work on. We need to lean out a lot of our classes. Things get added and added and added and added, and it's not surprising that students don't see how it all fits together. And so maybe we need to cut back on the number of topics, or, okay, you need to really understand this stuff well. You know, these 4 things. When I used to teach database, it was like, you need to understand conceptual modeling, logical modeling, and SQL. We're going to cover a bunch of other stuff. You need to know what it is so you can go look it up or ask somebody if you hear the term. And that kind of thing works well because it's like, look, when you go out, this is what you're going to do. And so you need to know this stuff. But if we can't say that about every one of the, I don't know, 50 or 100 topics we have in a class, because it's kind of not true.
And this is really hard in the Intro to Information Systems class because in IS, we could go all the way back to teaching about how a mouse works. At what point do we no longer need to talk about how does a mouse work? What are the inputs and the outputs? And I think that's true even beyond those topics. But in that intro class, it can get really, really big if we're not purposeful about saying, what do students absolutely need coming
What do
out
they
of here?
really need to know? Yeah.
And an exercise I learned about that one university was pushing their faculty to do, I'm not sure they did it across the board or just in a subset, but they had their professors throw away their syllabus and create brand new ones.
Yeah.
So that way they weren't anchoring on, this is how we have always done it. How do I tweak it to make it work? But it was truly building a new set of scaffolding, if you will, or topical areas based on what they really wanted to do in that course.
Yep. That's a great idea. Although I think we still need to teach the mouse, because I just spent like 45 seconds wondering why the touch screen on my Mac wasn't working.
Well, but then you use the touchpad, Craig, and not a mouse.
Yes, I know, but it's close enough. Close enough. So how do you pull this off? You know, you're an administrator now. What do you do for faculty that encourages them to experiment, that encourages them to rethink their entire course? That's a lot of work.
Well, a couple of things that I've done, you know, I mean, have I convinced people to redevelop their class? I don't think I succeeded with that. But one of the things I think is important is I challenged my faculty to do one thing that was purposeful stepping into AI and to feel like they could do it without the risk of poor teaching evaluations.
Yeah.
Assuming they were purposeful in learning from what it is that they change.
Yeah.
So creating a safe space for people to implement change, I think is important.
Now that if you punish failed experiments, you won't get any change. So we have a question from the audience.
I'm going to answer the other part of that question, and then we'll get our question.
Was there another part to that
There is,
question?
come on, it's a real quick one.
Come on.
The other thing I would say is we need to encourage faculty not to be in silos and to get people talking to each other so we're not all reinventing the same wheel.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question for both of you. First of all, I want to congratulate you for jumping onto the AI train really early on.
I was on camera and you weren't.
I don't want to be
You
on
don't want
camera.
me on camera? Okay.
So congratulations for jumping on the AI train really early. Now, what about other faculty? So I know a lot of faculty who are not necessarily as keen on keeping up with the AI everything. How much of an effort is it? How much should they get involved if they're not? And is AI going to be one of the other tools that's just going to become a tool?
So are we ready for a fishing metaphor from somebody who doesn't fish? So have you ever watched them fish for tuna? They slam the hook into a big old school of tuna and they try to yank a giant tuna fish out. It's a very violent thing. It's forced. It's really kind of makes me not want to eat tuna. And then there's fly fishing. Does anybody fly fish? Fly fishing, you put the fly out there, and if you have the right fly, it looks attractive, and you kind of slowly bring it in and twitch it around, and it's like, oh, that's a bug. I like bugs. And eventually your trout, I think you fly fish for trout, I don't know. Eventually your trout comes and hits the lure if you do it right, and then you reel it in. I think that's the approach. This is fly fishing. This is not tuna fishing. So if you have colleagues like that, show them one or two things they can do. Creating exam questions is great because we all hate doing it. AI is pretty good at it, especially if you tell them you don't have to take every question AI comes up with. It'll come up with 10 and 2 of them are good, but now you've got 2 questions you didn't have before. But pick that low-hanging, pain-in-the-butt fruit that, okay, just do this one thing. That's it. Just do this one thing. Don't try to drag them kicking and screaming because A, it won't work, and B, it's way too much work for any of us to do. So just show them. Show them. Do a little bit more, and then they'll find something else, and they'll do a little bit more, and they'll discover these uses for AI, because that's what we did. Have you heard this question before? I'm going to ask Hazel, what do you think my very first chat with ChatGPT was? Get your mind out of the gutter.
I didn't know there was.
Okay.
I'm that original.
Yeah, sure. So it was to write a poem about my cat, Taz. My cat, Taz, is this little gray fuzzball. Everything she does is funny. You've probably known cats like that. Everything. She lays down on something, and it's just funny. And it's not just me. It's not just her father. Everybody thinks she's funny. So I wrote this. I said, write a poem about this cat, Taz. And it wrote a poem about the cat, Taz. But it was pretty generic. It was kind of, it was about a cat, but it wasn't about Taz. So then I said, oh, she's a gray and white cat. She's small. She squeaks instead of meows. She likes to do this. And all of a sudden, I got this poem about Taz, not about some random cat, about Taz, that told me you have to have some context and some specificity when you prompt. I started learning. And then it just went from there. And I think that's what you do. Get them to do something either fun or that is that low-hanging fruit that solves some problem that something they just hate doing, and let them come along. And if they don't, they don't. That's their loss. Let them be like that.
So Craig, I think that works for 50% maybe of people, 75%. We can, by not staying in our silos, we can get people to come along. I think at some level, administrators need to at least ensure that every class is AI resilient. Because if you are cheating through someone's class today, let's say you let someone cheat, you knew a faculty member just let people copy off everybody's exams and you knew that, we would have those hard conversations and say, your class is not doing this thing right.
Yeah.
We need to work on fixing that. We need to be looking at every class and making sure that it's being done. And where they get the AI tools, I'm not convinced it has to happen in every single class. I think it probably needs to be happening in every single major, because there is some knowledge that learning it is important to understanding to be able to use those tools later on, perhaps in another class. So I think part of it is where is the tools being learned in the major, but the bigger part that we need to, whether it's through part of the annual evaluation process, is some sort of a curriculum mapping that helps us understand that every class does not let you cheat your way through it.
Yeah, and I think that's a different thing than getting them to use AI. But I agree with you 100%. They're really cheating the entire institution if they don't at least make their assignments AI resilient.
If you have a question, please come ask us, because otherwise you have to deal with the things that Craig and I think we want to talk about.
What are you saying? So we do have another question. This one is from Rosetta Romano, our president of SIGED. She sent us an email a few days ago that basically asks, who's paying for all this AI? How many of you are personally paying for one or more AI tools? All right, only 41 people raised their hand this time. Yeah, so a lot of us are. And now some of us have funding where we can get the tools, but a lot of faculty don't. And she's concerned about what happens in a cost-constrained institution around these AI tools, because the numbers start to get big pretty quickly. Rob, we talked about this last night. You had an interesting story.
So I think this is a really good question. And there's two sides of this that I want to talk about. So one is a university that I won't name because I'm going to get some of the details wrong. And I don't need my friends there coming up to me and saying something. But they started a pilot program that required interested faculty, and it probably included staff, to report monthly about how they were using it so they could learn about use cases along the way. And so they could see if they were actually using what was being paid for. Because the fear was, we're going to pay for these licenses and then half of them aren't going to be used anyway. So why are we paying for them?
Right.
And so then they could deploy them to somebody else who would use them. And so over the course of an academic year, they went from about 70, if my recollection of the story is correct, people in this program to 700. And with the, report to me, they were learning use cases, because that's one of the big struggles we had. Microsoft came to Washington State University to teach us how to use Copilot, which I was like, great. They wanted everyone to go to this training. They invested a lot of money into training. And when I went and asked them at the time we were done about use cases, their answer to me was, you have to figure those out on your own. Which I'm like, if we're going to bring in products and encourage people to use them, if we don't actually give a handful of use cases that are going to increase productivity, then what sort of a tool are we really giving people?
I think that's a really clever way to do it. Although the numbers get big, you figured it out, it's probably $160,000 or so per year, which a school of the size of the school that you are not naming can afford, but a lot of schools can't. That's a chunk of money. On the other hand, especially for business faculty, you can probably afford $20 a month if it makes your life easier. There are other faculty that don't get paid so well, and maybe at smaller institutions, community colleges, but I don't know. I'm willing to pay a little bit, but I know that's a privileged position. You can also go pretty far with the free tools.
You can, but here's the caution. And here's why, you call me Mr. Copilot when we talk, because I talk about it all the time. Copilot's been reviewed by Washington State University's attorneys and has been put on the acceptable use matrix. They have verified that it is FERPA compliant, HIPAA compliant, all of these compliances that we need to care about. None of the other tools are.
Yeah, you absolutely don't want to share anything personally identifiable about your students. I wouldn't do it about employees either. And that's a bad idea, but that still leaves a lot of use cases. I'm sorry, but every time I've tried to use Copilot, it has failed miserably.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's not my favorite tool,
So
but
I actually quit my license to OpenAI this last month.
did you?
Because they're starting to talk about monetizing by advertising to me. And it scares the heck out of me with Gemini, because they're tied into the entire Google ecosystem that already knows everything about me. I really, really, really think this whole making money thing is going to be an interesting conversation for the next year, because nobody is making money with AI right now.
Yeah.
And if we think back to social media and all these sorts of things and how they make money, it's based on the data that we give them. So
No, that's absolutely.
it is going to be scary, because I was reading about the mental health of teenagers the other day. And a lot of teenagers are picking up these apps and they are using it as their counselor, and they are sharing so much information with them
Yeah.
that, it's actually led to encouraging some to do some terrible, terrible things to themselves. But more troubling to me is the machine now knows even more about these children. And we don't have safeguards and safety rails in place. So.
And that's a problem. There's no doubt about that. I do want to plant a seed for some of you. It is not all that difficult to run some large language models locally. You get something like LM Studio. You need at least an okay computer, but you don't need some $10,000 workstation to run it. It's something that you can think about. They're not the frontier models. But like the one that OpenAI released, their OSS model, was kind of about 4.0, GPT 4.0 in terms of its capabilities. Llama has a model that'll handle a lot of context. They're not as good as the frontier models, but they're not bad.
Facebook just announced that they're going to quit releasing Llama because they want AI that makes them money.
I'm shocked. Well, I've already got it. So, all right. Any last questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
One question, because you mentioned it, so it came in my mind. There's a huge discussion coming about companionship, AI companionship, and that's what they told about. Is it like a trainer? Like, is it like a, yeah, I don't know, a personal mentor or something like that? And you see it also in the academic world. There are people, professors, training a LLM with the right system, all the information about administration, education, and so on. And they just auto-reply students, and they just say, okay, I have no time to email every student again. Where's the timeline? So it does an LLM. So it's also a kind of companionship another way around. So what do you think about AI?
So there are two pieces to that, right? And let me comment first, if you don't mind. The first piece is the companionship piece, the true trying to find a substitute for human companionship. And I'm going to put that one aside for a second. But the second one, with kind of loading up AI with all of the policies and that kind of thing, I am 100% for that. And cranky old man would say, they're not reading the syllabus. Why should I read their emails? But really, I think it's a very efficient way for them to get a 24/7 response, because I go to bed ridiculously early and I get cranky students because they emailed me at 10 o'clock at night and they didn't hear back until 4 o'clock the next morning. And it's some question that was actually answered in the learning management system. I think it's great. Now, you need to be careful, because even with these retrieval augmented generation systems, they can make mistakes and that sort of thing. So you have to be a little bit careful around disclaimers and all of that, but I don't see any problem with that. The companionship piece, the human companionship substitution piece.
Craig has not been drinking.
Maybe I should have been. That's a tougher question. So Rob, what do you have to say about that?
So I think there's a really interesting research question in there about the dark side of IS. And that is, in this world we live in with, especially since COVID, increased amounts of loneliness, the pandemic of loneliness you hear. People are looking at this as a solution to that with unintended consequences. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things to be understood because we don't know. And I think that's the whole thing with a lot of these AI things, I will say. It's no different than any other new technology. When technology comes out, we're very quick to jump on the benefits of what we can receive from them without fully understanding and knowing what the downside is or those unintended consequences. And I do think companionship is one of those places, because we put them right into the midst of human life and meeting people where they're at. It could be good for a certain number of people. That might be a good thing. But how bad is bad for the people who it ends up being really bad for? I don't know.
I know that's a really tough and interesting question. What I would like to see happen is some group create proper guardrailed AI companions, because if you had to tell me, should we have AI companions or should we not, I would come down on the side of we should, because I think there's so many lonely people out there that they're probably being helped more than the number of people that are being hurt. But I don't have data on that. We have a question from the audience.
In response to something that affected civilization that drove people apart, why should we accept AI as a solution to that problem?
Why not accept it? I mean, that's a really deep and interesting. No, it does. And I think it would be much better if we address the underlying cause, but we're not. So, is it better to at least have a Band-Aid? I don't know. I mean, I'm asking the question. I don't really know. And I think we're getting the high sign. Do you want to?
Yeah, we're getting it's time for us to wrap up.
Rob, any last thoughts?
I will say, again, we need to understand these technologies, the impact they're having in the classroom, the impact they're having on our students as they use them, the impact they're having on society. And I think there's a lot of great opportunities to understand that. And doctoral students who are listening, I think there are some great dissertations that could be written right now. And I'd be willing to bet that if you did a good job, that MIS Quarterly, ISR, top journals would listen to what you're doing.
Yep. All right, that's it. Thank you for joining us on the first ever live stream of AI Goes to College. And thanks again to the AIS Sig Ed folks for inviting us to do this. Bye. Thanks for listening to AI Goes to College. If you found this episode useful, you'll love the AI Goes to College newsletter. Each edition brings you useful tips, news, and insights that you can use to help you figure out what in the world is going on with generative AI and how it's affecting higher ed. Just go to aigoestocollege.com to sign up. I won't try to sell you anything, and I won't spam you or share your information with anybody else. As an incentive for subscribing, I'll send you the Getting Started with Generative AI guide. Even if you're an expert with AI, you'll find the guide useful for helping your less knowledgeable colleagues.